Good afternoon. Video artist. What's that? This is the response I often get from people when I say that's what I do. It surprises me because a visit to any contemporary gallery or museum is likely to lead to an encounter with this kind of work. But perhaps this question is indicative of a broader lack of understanding of the medium, which is, after all, only a few decades old, and despite the ubiquity of video in contemporary life, perhaps not so readily accepted as an art form as it is in the close-knit circles of contemporary practice and in the academy. But this question has another dimension for me as a practitioner. What is video art? Or at least, what are the essential characteristics that give it the right to be considered a medium in itself, as distinct from photography or narrative filmmaking? Unlike the latter, I felt it shouldn't involve extended viewing from a gallery goer necessarily. The spectator should be able to look at this kind of work for as short or long a time as they choose, just as one would with a painting or a sculpture. My own background was in narrative moving image. I spent 20 years as a TV director before joining the academy and redirecting my practice towards a form I had always not so secretly wanted to explore. I knew I wanted to get away from narrative, but otherwise I found it challenging. There is little in the way of established canonical guidance as to what to make and how. Anything goes seems to be the rule of thumb. And perhaps that's why gallery goers I speak to don't naturally lump all of the moving image work they see together into a single category. And perhaps that's fair enough. Apart from its youth, the diversity of work getting made is also related to the evolutionary history of the form. These evolutionary pathways include both the older and more established experimental filmmaking tradition and the practice of refashioning and satirizing the technology and content of television, and subsequently that of the internet and social media too. Among this diversity of pathways was one that seemed to me to get closer to the essence of what this medium could and should be doing, and that was the one that informed my own work. This was the adoption by performance artists in the 60s and 70s of documentation, initially photographic and subsequently and significantly cinematographic. The function of this documentation was, and still continues to be, twofold. As Amelia Jones puts it, many have relied on the photograph in particular as proof of the fact that a particular action took place, or a meaningfulness of the subject in performance, or as a marketable object to be raised to the formalist height of an art photograph. But the spin-off from this proof, then, is the ability not only for artists to market their work commercially, but to give gallery goers access to it in a mediated form within art spaces in years to come. We've all seen this kind of thing in galleries, a bunch of photos, some text, a bit of film. To a greater or lesser extent, it captures the mood and idea of the work. But despite their sometime aesthetic aspiration to formalist heights, these elements are more akin to archives in a library or repository than artworks. As performance artists like Yoko Ono, Marina Abramović, and countless others increasingly adopted and mastered photographic and cinematographic techniques, new intermedial works were created, according to Charu Maitani's notion of intermediality as a space for transformation and emergence. In these intermedial works, performances would take place without an audience. They were set up and staged with the camera in mind, then seamlessly integrated with the editing, leading to an intermedial fusion analogous to the cinema. Performance in this case takes on a breadth of meaning. In these hybrid works, the camera shooting from numerous angles is the audience, and the performance can often simply mean the performing of a simple or challenging act, walking round a chalk square for Bruce Norman, catching balls wearing a blindfold for Vito Acconci, or pulling a piece of thread apart for Quan Shun-chi. This kind of work is part of a lineage of works going back to Edward Muybridge and Etienne Jules Marais, which used the moving image or its constituent parts, a succession of still images, to study human motion. I like to think that this piece of mine, Time Machine, it's called, has a place in that lineage also. In it, I'm performing facial exercises, developed in order to tone the facial muscles and supposedly slow or even reverse the effects of aging. The close-up, slow-motion cinematography, lighting, editing, and monochrome grading are carefully integrated into this intermedial work. It's more then than just the performing of a task in front of a camera. And it certainly isn't the documentation of a live event. As I mentioned, I was searching when I started making video art for something that seemed somehow to represent the essence of the form. What could it do that a painting, a sculpture, or a still photograph couldn't? I'm not sure there's an exact answer to this question, but I found that my work was increasingly involved with human action and expression. A contingency, in other words, motion or emotion, evolving in time that somehow reveals deeper truths about us. Studying and presenting this fundamental motion in moving images aroused my interest in something else. In 1977, Rosalind Krauss wrote about the extraordinary variety and plurality of media that had emerged in the fine art field: story art, body art, land art, and the ways in which they were documented as indexes in Peirce's system of semiotics. It is the order of the natural world, she said, that imprints itself on the photographic emulsion and subsequently on the photographic print. The point about the index, as Thomas Googe reminds us, is that it has a direct physical connection with its object. It fixes what is represented. In the documentation of a performance, then, the still or moving image of the artist at work fixes and preserves it in time. And beyond performance, this species of sign can also denote the traces left by a person, an aesthetic record of their existence, perhaps long after their death. My work, Time Machine, was preoccupied with the fallibility of our bodies, as well as being rooted in the observation of the beauty and form of their movement. The index can offer an interesting discursive vehicle for addressing the specific problem of their decline and eventual extinction. This work, Breath's Imprint, I made during the pandemic, is also preoccupied with this theme. Like most of us, I spent a good deal of that strange time indoors, and no doubt I was not alone in staring out of the window from time to time. One day I was doing this and found myself watching the condensation of my breath on the glass. This condensation is a kind of index, so filming it creates an index of an index. And yet this index is not fixed the way Googe expresses it. The condensation grows and spreads, and then just as quickly it recedes, fades, and dies. Breath is a fundamental of life, a vital sign, and both the apparent target of the pandemic disease and its vector. This work is the index as memento mori. Here is a performance-like act, as with Time Machine, shot and edited in an intermedial moving image form. Unlike Time Machine, it's an abstract work. There's no evident representation of the human figure. The performance in this work has become hidden, as invisible as a continuity cut or a light source beyond the frame. The piece could be an animation or CGI, a moving image work entirely generated through a single process. There's no longer any sense of a boundary between the performance and its mediation. In Yvonne Spielman's words, the different elements are connected and merged into each other, thereby creating a new form. This journey, though, from a live performance through documentation to a fully integrated and merged intermedial work is not without its cost. There's a quality to performance in front of an audience that is surely lost during this transition. And that is the interaction that a performer has with the audience members, which effectively involves or implicates the spectator in the work's creation. How can we prevent the production of these artworks becoming a one-way communication and restore an active role to the gallery goer? I've been struck by Falk-Heinrich's readings of phenomenology in performance art, in which the performer's fleshiness can only flourish as a stage presence in a theoretical movement that both audience and performer execute, or more accurately, in a theoretical intake of each other's different observer positions. That is to say, the work requires the spectator's presence to complete it. I'll diverge for a moment away from video to look at this recent work of mine. This is called Figure Study in Light, and I was showing in Kolkata, India over the last 2 months. It's based on Taylor's measures of my vital statistics and is themed around body image. The ribbons of light could be presented together in the center of a room as a schematic human figure. But I wanted to spread it around the space so the complete figure cannot be fully visualized, and the gallery goer is invited to wander around it. By glimpsing and remembering different perspectives, the spectator assembles a view of the figure in their mind, much as we create images of our bodies that are freighted with our presuppositions and insecurities. Of course, this work owes a debt to the minimalist sculptures of the 1960s. And the question of the work that the spectator does in realizing the intention of the piece is central to Michael Fried's intervention of 1966, Art and Objecthood. His objection to minimalism was precisely this thing that I think is so important in any work deriving from performance, that the gallery goer is reminded of their presence in the space rather than being transported to some other aesthetic and emotional place, as Fried felt was the duty of modernism. I use the example of figure study because this phenomenological approach is so clearly integral to the full realization of this work. But video artists such as Hilary Lloyd, among many others, use sculptural installations that introduce Fried's sense of theatrical participation, as he called it, to the gallery goer's experience of video work. Wherever possible, I try to do something similar. Here are a few installation shots, including the 2 works I spoke about earlier. Time Machine, projected from within a fleshy webbed cage construction, and Breath's imprint, here seen on a weighty CRT monitor. At the start of this talk, I spoke about my quest to find a moving image form for gallery goers that offered alternatives to the conventions of the narrative moving image. In a cinema, the spectator is pinned in a single seat, gazing up at a gigantic screen, lost in the emotional arc of the story. With the 4-way intermediality of performance, cinematography, post-production, and sculptural installation, the spectator is able to participate in the construction of the finished work through their own phenomenological relationship to it, and in so doing, regain some of what has been lost in the translation of performance into artifact. Thank you.